I welcome you to another episode of Learning Stories. This is a show where we interview a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. On each episode of this show, we interview a guest who has a story to share about how they acquired a set of skills and knowledge in a creative and innovative manner. In the process, we hope to uncover a new understanding of learning as conceptualized, imagined, and narrated by the guest in our show. Today's guest, Samira Gupta, is someone who I found on Substack, fortunately, and for the past week or so, I've really enjoyed, browsing through her wonderful writing on the platform. But she's also a wonderful visual communication designer. So a little bit about her before we jump into this conversation. So Samira started her design career in 2008 after graduating from the Srishti School of Art, Design and Technology. In her initial years, she worked with a commercial design studio, then consulted independently while teaching design before moving on to a new trajectory. In 2011, she co-founded Studio Ek Saath with Dhritiman Dev Pillai with the aim of building partnerships and creating effective communication for clients from the ground up. Over 14 years, Samira has looked at design with a multi-pronged approach, immersing herself in writing for theatre, writing books, collaborating with designers, building a strong voice for her studio, and constantly changing to meet the growing demands of design in the digital world. But beyond design, she's also the published author of two books. She's part of a theatre group in Delhi. She's currently working on Naqab, a year-long project that looks at the various masks she has worn as an Indian woman. Samira draws inspiration from her immediate world, her lived experiences, her curious 9-year-old daughter, and the people she meets and the conversations she has. This is something I really enjoy doing at the start of a podcast, Samira, is just reading someone's introduction to understand, their journey and where they've come from, Samira. So to get started, Samira, before we jump into, the many roles and the many identities that you have, I'm just curious about Samira as a child, growing up, what were some of the things you were curious about at school, outside school? So if you could give us a little picture of Samira as a student or a child, that would be wonderful.
Right. So I grew up in a massive joint family in Calcutta and under a very strict patriarch who was my grandfather. So a lot of my initial learning experiences have come from very rigid structures within which we had to operate at home. Many kids, about I think we were 10, 11 cousins growing up together, lots of aunts and uncles. But even within that, was my first sort of foray into the politics of joint families, the politics of gender, and the power play that happened behind doors in homes. So what happened with the men in the family and the women, and that was my very very initial early foundation of how gender roles are very clearly defined, and that kind of stuck with me for a very long time in a way that classical conditioning does, right? You live that and you feel that because you have lived it, that is the only way, and that is the way the whole world functions. And when I moved away from Calcutta is when a sort of new kind of reality started setting in, which is very different from this very um, kind of cocooned little world and society that I'd grown up in. During my school years, I think I was in an all-girls school, as were most kids in Cal at that time. There were boys' schools and there were girls' schools. So our genders were very, I was very curious about the other sex growing up. That was one of the biggest things that I can think of as a kid, because I never had a chance to interact with boys my age, older or younger, in a platonic manner. So boys became this like mystical being that girls did not know how to talk to. And if a boy came up to you at some party, or I mean, we weren't even going for parties, but at a Christmas carnival somewhere, I did not know how to talk to them. They weren't considered normal human beings. They were just considered boys, who would flirt with you. Or so I never had male friends growing up, and that informed a lot of my body language, the way I saw the world, the way I thought I should be perceived. And so beauty came into the mix. There was skin color, there was, sort of the way you talk, the way you walk. That was one very big aspect of growing up in a girls' school, and also being protected in such a way that it became almost harmful. And I don't think it was a conscious decision on the part of my parents. It's just the way the community was around us at that time. Very closed, very suspecting, very, if you're seen with boys, what do people say? Women were termed loose very easily. Women who drank and partied openly were not, even young girls were not considered, what do we call it, marriage material. And so we were protected so that we could be marriage material. That's really where the grooming happened. And so there was this part, and then there was this energy as a young adult, as an adolescent, that had to be spent somewhere. So I got into sports a lot. And I wasn't a very good sports person, but I realized that I had some kind of skill set in leading in school. And so I was a vice captain, and I was the captain of my house. And those were my first initial experiences of what it felt like to work with a team, how to get students to collaborate with each other, how to look at ego, fight, help them work with each other instead of against each other, because otherwise we would never win. And though that was a very, very rich experience for me in school, in terms of having the power to make decisions, which came from my grandfather, and which came from, I'm my grandfather runs a business in Calcutta. So we had a mithai shop, which was very, very popular, very well known. And so I got some amount of that. I suppose you live in that environment, and that kind of need for power and authority seeps into you. So I became quite authoritarian as a young 15-16 year old. I liked the fact that I had, I was top level boss, and the decisions of the team players and whatever would happen would eventually, be mine in the end. But I also really liked the fact that I could nurture team members, I could teach them, and perhaps also encourage them to, you know, excel by not expecting the best, but saying, you are good enough, and if you try hard enough, that's all that matters. So winning is not the end goal. The fact is that we work as a team and we support each other. So these were my two, in early years, these were all really, really big. The sexuality of being a young uh, teenager, I suppose, and then the sort of other extreme pendulum of actually being a leader in a space which is all women. And so the dynamics of a women's school or a girls' school is very different from a co-ed school. We just work differently. Everyone's being groomed in that school, in knitting, in home science, in the right way to sit with your legs under, very British,
Yeah.
and the right way to greet, different. Even respect is kind of skewed in these spaces. You respect because there are teachers, you do, and because it's expected of you, and not because you actually respect them. So it just automatically became, if there are older people, there's a certain way you talk to them, there's a certain way you greet them. There was no space for dissent in my school. There was no space for voicing issues that we had. It was a very top down approach in a very traditional schooling system. But even within that, I had a set of friends that were totally wild and fun, and followed rules, but found sort of cracks and crevices through which they could kind of escape. So we found our own little worlds in that space. But that kind of closed society impacted all my friends, including me, in a variety of different ways when we grew up and moved away from Calcutta to different colleges. And the stories are very similar in terms of our growth in certain ways, and all of us at that batch are now 40 plus. So we have enough time and enough space to look back and say, okay, this is what had happened, this is what how it informed me, and this is how it's led my journey so far. So yeah, I mean, I could go on, but these were two really big uh, events or things that happened in my teenage years.
Yeah, and while listening to you, I can see so much of your writing voice also come through. You know, I was reading some of your pieces in the Nakab series, and it's
Yeah,
just so beautiful how you are able to, bring those associations with early memories and current memories, Mira. And I think when I'm reading it, it's almost like I'm experiencing some of those memories as you write about it and speak about it.
thank you.
And when you were also sharing, the stories about your sexuality and, the things the unsaid things you observe, growing up as a child in India, I was just wondering about, because in India, when we grow up, often, at least early on in the 80s and 90s, there's this unsaid sort of rule where, you're assumed to be in a particular profession from a very young age. And, it's either an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer,
Yeah.
and I think different families have different codes for how they transfer, these rules to their children. But growing up, I had that. And
Mhm.
I think engineering, medicine, or law were the three careers I could choose from. And
Right.
my sister is also a visual communication designer. And I remember her going through her journey of,
Mhm.
asking and finding a way to make space for that sort of world. And she studied design, and I know that's a similar experience for you as well. So in grade 9, 10, 11, and 12, was like mass communication something you were always curious about? And why did you make that decision to choose mass communication at that point in your life?
Okay, that's a really interesting question. I wasn't a I wasn't a very good student.
Hmm.
In a class of say we had about 48 girls in my section, and we had four sections. I was kind of always mediocre
Hmm.
somewhere in my and we had ranking, right? This awful system of first in class and last in class.
Hmm.
Everybody was ranked and the ranks were open. We all knew what the ranks were. And it was a very embarrassing system because when the grades came out at the end of the year, my mom would always ask me, "What's your rank?" Which means, where do I stand amongst this tiny mix of 48 girls, all from different backgrounds, with different skill sets, with different ways to absorb information? And I was very bad at mucking up.
Hmm.
Like the teaching system at that time was, you get a textbook, you mug up that paragraph verbatim, and if you write it verbatim you'll get full marks. But if you actually use your brain to think, analyze, and give a cohesive argument, you will not get good marks, because the teachers themselves are kind of judging you on just basic parameters, and your English paper might be judged by a maths teacher and your history paper might be judged by an art teacher. So it was, the system was really messed up. And so very early on I kind of realized that I'm not built for academics. It's not happening. And so I found sports to be a great release, in terms of I've really got into it in many ways. And by ninth and 10th, my only hope was that I should pass maths and Hindi. You know, it was like I was an absolute failure in maths. My Hindi teacher would tell me, "I don't think you're going to pass and you might have to repeat your paper." So it's kind of demoralizing, kind of a bad experiences with my math teacher, because I just did not understand numbers the way other kids did.
Hmm.
Like we didn't even get into calculus, thank God. But even at algebra, I was like, I still don't know it. A square, B square, whatever it is. And there was a certain amount of embarrassment with it, because a captain and a prefect and a girl at that level doesn't is a failure at math. So we were expected to be all rounders
Yeah.
and good in all subjects and always doing well and always working. So there were maths tuitions and there were Hindi tuitions, and I don't think any of it really helped. I just somehow pulled through in 10th. And I was in a state board. So the West Bengal state board is called the Madhyamik board, which is a very, very difficult board to really get good grades.
Hmm.
An 80, 82 is considered absolutely excellent marks at that time. I must have got 64, 65% or something at 10 standard. And I did not want to do Madhyamik again in plus two.
Mm.
And I was like, this is going to be the death of me. Like, I will go nowhere in life. And by then, I had kind of understood that Madhyamik results come out late. So there's a technicality. They come out late by which all the other colleges admissions are done. And
Mm.
I did not want to do my college in Calcutta. My prospects were very limited. So after class 10, I moved to Bangalore.
Mm.
My aunt somehow got me through another girls' school, convent. So I moved from a Birla school to a convent school, uh, which was an ISC board. And it was like for me, it was long term planning, saying that, okay, if I do this now, I might get better marks, more hope to move into Bombay or other colleges and things like that. So in plus two, I moved to commerce. And at that time, you had arts, you had commerce, you had science.
Mm.
And there was the general notion that take commerce if you don't know what you want to do. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. I liked drawing, I liked writing. That was always there, but it was never something that was considered a profession
Mm.
or a career, something that you could make a career out of. So, couple of things happened when these decisions were being made. So I had lived in this joint family till about 10, 11 years of age. Then my parents, my younger brother, and I moved away from the joint family, and then we were nuclear for my entire teenage years, which was a different shift. But my parents were never the type to say you can do this, and that's it. My mom was fine with me just passing. She said, as long as you work hard and do your best, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter beyond that if you are excelling or this and that. You'll find your way. And I think this is a thing with business families because we are just brought up differently. We
Yeah.
are not brought up to be service oriented, to get into the service sector. We are brought up to lead businesses. So our education, whether it is, you know, whether my family meant it or not, was always tuned towards leading,
Mm.
to having your own space, doing your own thing. And for my mom, she was like, I'm educating you because you should be educated. But eventually, for her, she was like, my daughter will get married and have her kids, and that was the trajectory. Really, I wasn't ever groomed to be a businesswoman or someone who would actually have a career,
Mm.
and neither were those expectations kind of put on me in any way. I don't know whether those expectations were because nothing would come of me because I have never did well in anything, or because she was just very clear that iska kya karna hai, to ab shadi karke she will then do whatever she wants to with her husband and his family. So in 11th, I took commerce because I should have taken arts. And I wish I did. And that was a mistake I made because I loved literature and I loved the stories and I loved to study it through the lens of an English teacher who would explain it. It was a very, very rich world for me. I loved history. And for some idiotic reason, I took commerce because I was told by everybody without an exception that if you don't know what to do, please take commerce because commerce will give you more options. No idea what these options were. So I took commerce. I tried maths for a month and then I told my teacher that, look, I'm going to fail. I can't do maths. Can you please just let me take additional English? So somehow some concessions were made and I was economics and accounting and literature, Hindi, English, and then additional English.
Mm.
That's how I kind of, so ninth to 12th, I survived academics, is what I would say. I never thrived in that space. I thrived in the spaces outside school with friends. That's when I moved to Bangalore is where the world of boys opened up. And I was young. I was 17, 18, raging hormones. It was that was all I was interested in. I was interested in relationships. I was interested in, getting to know more men my age or older, understanding this beast that had eluded me my whole life. And that's where the fun was, and I had this mom who's in Calcutta who's worrying about this daughter I was staying with my grandparents and my uncles in Bangalore. They had hosted me while I was studying. So that's when, so by the time I graduated 12th, there was this buzzword of mass comm, and everyone was talking about it, become a very new big thing that, hey, there's this thing in which you can do film and radio and, it's for creative people and things like that. And after doing accounting for 2 years and economics, I said, I can't, this is not my scene. So one of my options was to do journalism, which I was keen on because I enjoyed writing. But I did not want to be a journalist. I wanted to write books even then. And there were really no courses in creative writing like there are now. Also, at that time, the courses were all abroad, and we were very clear that this is not a scholarship kid. It's not going to get anything. So, if since I had studied in Bangalore, I went to college and I decided to do mass comm. Even then, there was an all women's college and there was a co-ed college. And my mom, for whatever reason, the all women's college was a 5 minute walk from my house in Bangalore. So she used that as like a means to say, okay, that's the college you should go to, because the co-ed college is very far. It was very far. It was about 45 minutes from where I stayed. And so I moved into a women's college and I did mass comm. I got through by grace of God, and that is really where my learning began. Because that was a rich experience. Of course, there were a lot of women, but I didn't know any better. I would always been with women, so it was a familiar space. But the faculty members were fantastic. I was introduced to a lot of different mediums. I was, shown different ways of thinking, different ways of storytelling, the same angle from different, perspectives. How would parents think? How would a young man think? How would a young girl think? How would a group of friends think? So we did filmmaking. We ran a radio station. Um, I think we did a lot of interviews as parts of our exercises. We had my faculty member was just fantastic. The dean of communication, she's still there. I think Shana Das. So I remember her being this absolutely fiery, energetic woman who was always ready for new things. And I also studied psychology and English. So I felt like each informed the other. So if you understand the psychology of people, you understand storytelling. If you've understood literature and the way stories are being told that are enriching and that have lasted, centuries, people still read the classics, then you understand how what draws people in. And so we used tools of psychology, our learning from literature, to really get into the media, so to say. It was just an initial, it was just that course was just like dipping your toes in seawater. Like the sea is vast and there's so much you can learn, and this was just like a basic introduction to saying, if this interests you, you go on to learn further.
Mm.
The hope was that I'll graduate, come back to Calcutta, find a good boy, and get married. That narrative remained across my 20s.
Mm.
But there was an interesting experience that happened in college. I took an internship with a very big leading ad agency as a copywriter, because I did not have skills as an art person. And at that time, I'm not entirely sure how ad agencies work now, but at that time, a copywriter and an art director worked in pairs.
Mm.
So one did the kind of digital work, and then the copy guy or the copy woman thought about all these interesting, smart, funny things to say about a brand. So I had this internship, and it was the worst internship I have ever done in my life. And it is one of my most defining moments because it was so bad. So there were many learning lessons there. One was that the politics were too much for me as a young kid. I was about 20 or 21 when I did this internship. Second was that it was extremely sexist and gendered. Um, and I saw how women were spoken about in that space behind their backs. So women who'd won awards, there were a lot of insecure men in that ad agency who would then talk dirty behind their back, saying now that she's won an award, she's walking around with her boobs in the air, and it's just like really not funny. And there was always laughter. Women were excluded from all these all male soirees that were held every Friday. They would have these beer nights, beer and carom nights. people would sort in at 11, 12. Work ethics were kind of really skewed. Everyone started working at 4 in the evening and worked at 2 till 2 in the morning. And I was questioning all of these. I was like, why can't you just come in at 10, finish at 5, and then have a life? And I was this little intern who had no voice, and someone who's kind of uh, not really mentor material. The person that I was supposed to report to, he would just hand me books and read and say, read them. So I would go there at 11, read from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then leave. And his education was, if you don't know what is good advertising, you can't do good advertising. So it was not like it was supported with do some copy here, do some copy there, which I did end up doing after a while, because I was so fed up that I would read with a vengeance so that I could finish, so that I could be given some work to do, because I had to kind of support this and tell my dean and my college faculty members that I had done something of substance over the summer holidays. I like, this was not a mandatory internship. It was an internship I took because I thought I could gain from it. I did gain from it, but not in the way I expected. And then at some point I came up with, I think, one really good line of copy, which was approved. And then I was told, find an art person to do the artwork for you. And it took me 1 week of begging and pleading and can someone do it, someone do it. Everyone was always busy. Everyone was always, too cool to take on this intern. I really had no one would talk. So I was put into one little cubicle and I sat alone the whole day. There wasn't any interaction with anyone else. And then finally there was this very sweet Mallu boy who took pity on me and said, you know what, I'll come early tomorrow, 1 hour early, and I'll do your copy for you, because you've been he'd seen me asking around. And that is when I decided that I will learn design,
Mm.
because I don't have the skill set and I should have the skill set to do my own artwork. And I said that as my skills are not good enough to survive in a workplace like this, and if I am to come here, I will be my own art director, my own art and my own copy, one person. I don't need a team, and I'm not going to do this. It was just it was very toxic. The environment was very toxic, and I understood the toxicity much later. It was not while I was in it. It was just it just made me uncomfortable, and I wasn't sure why I was so uncomfortable. And so that's when someone recommended Shrishti, and they said, go and meet this faculty member. So I went and I started dabbling in Photoshop and Illustrator and horrible work with no understanding of, DPI and screen size and how to put things together. But I was interested. I'd got some crack version of it, and I said, let me go and meet this faculty. And I met her, and she said, well, your work isn't bad if it's self-taught. Work on it a little bit more and apply. So Shrishti had a space for kids who'd graduated who wanted to study design, who could come in midway. It was a 4.5 year course, and in the third year you could come where kids chose their specialization. Is when they opened up space for other graduates to come in to move directly into a specialization space. So that year, I worked very hard to do design work. So I led a campaign against domestic violence in which I'd done a lot of poster. I did a leaflet. I got involved in a lot of publication work that's happening in college, just to build my portfolio, because I couldn't draw at all, and I knew that I had to offset that skill with something else. So I ended up going with a fairly decent portfolio. I got through Shrishti. And so, in a way, I have that horrendous advertising internship to thank, because if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have realized that, I don't want to be dependent on other people. And in retrospect, that sense of dependency also comes from, again, linking back to how I grew up with my family, where we were all business people and everybody was kind of self-sufficient or leader-like in the way that they portrayed themselves to the world. And so we were not taught to ask for help. It's not something that is easy for me to do even now. I don't, we were taught that you don't need people. Whatever you need is within you. You figure it out. We don't reach out for business people, don't reach out for, we only reach out if there's a profit margin involved or there's something that we have to gain from it. And so I think that little bit seeped in. I was very annoyed that I was dependent on someone to do my work, and they were not doing it when I wanted it done. Again, business family, like, I want it done, it'll be done now because I have the power and authority. And that time I had zero authority. Like, it was completely stripped. As an intern, you are the lowest, maybe even lower than the lowest rung in the ladder. So so that kind of led me to study design. And that was where my life kind of pivoted. It was almost like a absolute 180-degree turn from everything I had learned. Then I reached Srishti, and then I was told that we are not going to tell you what to do. I remember my faculty member, some assignment was given to me, and I said, okay, what do you want me to do? And he looked at me and saying, what do you mean? Why are you asking me? So I said, well, you've got to tell me what I'm supposed to do. And he said, is that how you've grown up your entire life, being told what to do? And I was very embarrassed because I had all these, young art kids all sniggering and laughing at the back. And um, I remember being very quiet, and I said, okay, so I have to think for myself. And he said, yes, this is art school, and that's what we do in art school. You think for yourself. And that that was the pivotal moment. That's the first time in my life that someone had asked me for my opinion and what I thought, and not what they think I should do. And that was the change in moving from, and it was a gradual change from moving cities to getting into a girls' college to, rebelling in whatever minor ways we could, to having campaigns, and then being shoved into this completely open, free thinking, hippie space where everything goes. There's no right or wrong, there's no correct way of thinking, there's no manners or etiquette. People were, you could talk to your faculty members however you wanted to. They were your friends. They weren't really, venerated, or like, there wasn't this thing of respect was removed from the equation. It was a very free space, and it was the right space for somebody like me who'd come from such a closed culture of thinking, uh, to a place where um, everything was fine, from, like sexuality was rampant, uh, which is very, for me, it was like, where have I come? And if my mom knew this is the space that I'm studying it, she would pull me out. So I was very closeted about the kind of information I gave out to her. And I was also very curious to see a very different world where boys and girls were friends. They weren't just partners or lovers or boyfriends or girlfriends. They were actually friends. And so I spent those 2 years mostly on the fringes, observing how these dynamics were kind of playing out. Yeah, I've digressed, but sorry, it was a trajectory of thought.
Such a beautiful retelling of those stories, Samira. And
Yeah.
because I spent 2 years in the classroom as a classroom teacher,
Hmm.
Samira. Always wondered how how students perceive, because when you were mentioning things about how you chose a particular stream because of an assessment or an exam, I was able to relate to that because
Yeah.
I did not like science because I was put through that engineering stream, so I ran as far away from it. I did commerce. I didn't like commerce because I didn't do well in the exam, so I went into arts. And it's so amusing because now I love science, I love commerce, and I think in so many ways on a day-to-day basis we have to apply that mathematical thinking in our own lives, whether as adults, when we do taxes, when we manage our own budgets.
Yeah.
So just thinking about how children think about careers based on how adults talk about them is really interesting to understand.
Yeah.
And listening to your experience also, such a such a powerful journey, because you had to navigate those patriarchal structures consistently
Yeah.
and find your own space at such a young age. This is such a brave decision to not only study arts, but
Yeah.
to do it in a context that was empowering for you. And it made me really think about my own experience through that period. But I'm thinking about like your experience right out of college as well, Samira. A
Hmm.
lot of people would, prefer going into an agency, which you had some internship experience with.
Yeah.
But looking through your profile, I noticed that very soon after your undergraduate course, you were able to start off your independent studio and work on projects. So, and I think I see like a connecting thread where you had that leadership ability from your sports and finding that space in university as well. But wasn't it scary at some point, starting your own independent studio, finding clients? So what was that entrepreneurial experience like at such a young age, and how did you do that at that point?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it's a fun party story we tell a lot of people.
Yeah,
Um, so after Bangalore, so a lot of my decisions were have been linked to boyfriends.
got it.
You know, and sadly, so I was dating somebody when I was in my women's college, which is Mount Carmel College in Bangalore, and I knew my mom wanted me to get married when I graduated, and so I partly I did want to study design, partly I did not want to get married at 21, 22. And I figured if I studied, I gave myself 2.5 more years of freedom, you
Hmm.
know. And then of course that relationship fell through, and I got introduced to the most wonderful group of people who are my closest friends now from college, from Shishti. Peers, colleagues, absolute like solid people that I've met, solid faculty members, and then I started dating somebody in Shishti. So I also went from from toxic environments to toxic relationships, and those toxic relationships informed so many of my decisions. And my mom didn't like this particular boyfriend at all, so she did not want me in um, Bangalore after I graduated. She wanted me back in Calcutta again, and I think I finally gave in because there's a limit to how much you can fight your parents beyond a point. So I said, okay, I'll come back after graduation. I tried working in a studio in Calcutta for a couple of months, and I was genuinely miserable. And I think my mom saw that, and we had a very honest chat, and I said I really, with the things that I've learned and the things that I want to do in my career, Calcutta is really not the space for me right now. It's too nascent in design, and the really good studios are not here. So she said, you can go to Delhi or Bombay, you cannot go back to Bangalore,
Hmm.
whatever you do. I don't know what her thinking was as an adult. Maybe she said she thought that if I had distance from this boy, I would realize he was toxic. She could see it, I couldn't. Whatever the reason, I chose Delhi because I was not going to do Bombay and pay those crazy rents and live in suburbs and travel by local. And then I'd heard really horror stories about this 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Bombay culture, and I didn't want that. And I had my cousin sister in Delhi, who's the only family member I had here at that time. So I said, okay, Delhi doesn't seem bad, and a lot of my like sort of friends from my batch were in Delhi. So on a whim, I was like, fine, Bombay, Delhi, let's do Delhi. Delhi will be easier. With no idea of what the city had to offer, what was it like? I've like it was I was young and foolish in the best way possible. I didn't overthink anything at that time. I just all wanted to do was escape the society of Calcutta, and this people asking when is your daughter getting married or is she meeting this that. I just want, that's why I ran away literally from Calcutta. I came to Delhi, set up 4 5 interviews, met lots of people over 2 3 days, landed a job, and went back, packed my bags, and came. So my mom came here to help me set up. I had friends who helped find a place, and all of that happened. And it's the first time I lived by myself. No flatmate, no nothing. I had a little tiny little garage house somewhere, and I worked in a design studio for about a year and a half. I never thought of opening my own studio when I started. I thought that I would need 4 5 years in the field to learn the ropes of the business, to get clients, to have expertise. But it was quite difficult, the design space, because I had come from a very rosy art school kind of place where we took time to process the brief and we worked through it, and there were iterations, and there was a that you had to show process in your work in college, and that was not needed in the workspace that I was in. Like, logos had to be done overnight. People were doing 50-50 options. Clients were rejecting it all. And then I had one client that I got stuck with for a whole year. And it was just like absolutely soul draining work. It was just awful. And after a while, I said, I can't do this. I just couldn't. I had like lovely colleagues. I had a great boss, very understanding. I had no problem in the space. I made, you know, my from knowing no one in Delhi to knowing 20 people in Delhi happened because I was in this very young, it was a very 30 below. That's it. That was the age group that I was with. It was a PR and design studio. So it was a fantastic experience. But after about a year and a half or so, I felt like I don't want to do this work. I just don't. And so I just quit. And I said, I'll figure it out. I quit without plan. I had a couple of freelance clients because I had some very high lifestyle, choices uh, that were I was making that needed a lot of money. I loved shopping, I liked drinking, I liked traveling. So I had decided I'll quit. And at that time, I got an offer to teach at a design college, which was giving me just enough to pay my rent and get by, little bit more than my actual current design salary. And I had a couple of freelance clients that kind of met along the way, worked with them. They liked me. I liked working with them. And I said, I'll get by. So all I wanted to do for a year was earn enough money to travel. And at that time in Delhi, my core friends were all there. Everyone was there. It was one of the most beautiful 2 years of my life. That youth of Delhi at 20, when I was about 26, 27. So I would teach in college thrice a week for half a day. I do a bit of freelance, and then I would take off and travel. So at that time, we visited Haridwar and Rishikesh during the Kumbh Mela. I traveled to Pushkar for the Holi. They have a very, very interesting Holi that happens at Pushkar. I did treks here and there. I took off on a whim with friends. I had an opportunity to actually also travel to Italy on a junket through a couch surfer. So I don't know if you're aware of this. At that time, couch surfing was this platform where international travelers would come and you would lend them your couch for free. It's not paid, and in return there would be it's a cultural exchange, and they would kind of help you cook or clean or keep. I had a flatmate at that time, and I was also very lonely in the evenings because she was in and out, and I liked company. I loved people. And so I signed up on Couchsurfing, and it did well. And I had, foreigners from everywhere coming in and staying with us for a week, returning, this, that. And I made some really great friends through that exchange. And one of them, an Italian boy, had come and stayed with me, who came for my wedding also later. And he said, Sam, why don't you come? I'm organizing this junket in Italy, and you are an aspiring writer, and I want to give you a chance. Come. All you have to do is make sure you publish one article about it in the papers. I knew somebody who did page 3 with Times of India. And I said, well, if I write about Tuscany, will you publish, kind of put it out there? And she said, yeah, go, go, go. So I went on this absolutely crazy, luxurious trip to Italy, staying in these heritage places and fancy places and traveling everywhere and eating great food and coming back. So that year I did all of that. After quitting my job, I said, well, let me see what are the things I could do. And I had, for good or bad, I don't know, I had no planning. I had no future skills. At that time, I was escaping, as I had been for a while, marriage. And I wanted to make sure I had enough money so that my mom couldn't call me back home. That is essentially what was happening. And so I spent a year like that, teaching. And then I had a fallout at the college or something. I was young, and I'm a short-tempered person. So I think something happened that irked me, and I just quit overnight as I'm not doing this. And that's when I started realizing that I have a problem with authority, and I don't work well under someone. And because maybe my genetic buildup is like that. I have no idea. Or the way I've grown up, or the way I've seen my grandfather run his business, or my uncles around me. The women in my house were also very powerful, strong women, who were just victims of bad circumstance, I guess. But I was surrounded by, people who were not willing to take shit from other people. And so this authority became a problem. So even though I had wonderful people who had worked under, I did not like answering to anybody in any way. Uh, and that became very obvious when I quit this college gig and realized that I'm better off on my own. So either I'll consult and freelance and continue like that, as long as I only answer to the client who's actually paying me and not anyone else. And at that time, I happened to get a project to do Ritu Dalmia's website. This is almost 17, 16 years ago, 15 years ago. And it was very new and I was very scared. And I was dating someone yet. I was dating Tritiman at that time. And I asked him, will you support me? Should we do it together? Because I need somebody to riff the ideas off. And we did that website together. And she had lots of restaurants and she wanted one collective website to showcase all the restaurants that she had in Delhi. And we worked really well together. And after that, we said, I don't actually remember how it happened, but we said, okay, we worked well together. Why don't we start a design studio? Because Ritiman comes from he studied furniture and interiors. I studied visual communication. So we had like a combined skill set, which was pretty rich in terms of what we could offer. So he said, well, we work well together. Let's start. And he had this little garage space, which you see, this is my studio, which he and his mom had built together where they could work. And he said, we can clean out that space and open our studio. And that's how the studio opened. With no foresight, no thinking, I'm opening a design studio with my boyfriend. I have not thought it through. I mean, what if we break up? What will happen? It's like I think it's the energy of youth. It's like, we'll see. And a lot of my friends from my older agency kind of supported it, saying, okay, you've started design studio, let me send some clients your way. They'd also quit. They were doing their own new PR business. So we actually started with word of mouth and through some very kind people who introduced us to clients who, kind of trusted us enough to do that work initially in the first couple of years of starting the studio. But there was absolutely no thought. We didn't think through finances. We didn't think that we would have to do taxes every year. We'd have to hire an accountant. There would be trouble because the thing was that we didn't have to pay rent for the space.
Yeah.
So it is a family building out of which we function. And that's really one of the reasons that just propelled us to say, try. If it doesn't work, we'll see after a year what else we can do. Because at that time, the world was my oyster. I could do anything I wanted. So I think that's how the studio began. And it was a very warm space. We had friends dropping in the evening. There were games of Ludo. There were weeks when we had no work, where we would just doodle around and kind of do our own design. And then slowly through word of mouth, through referrals, through, people who had seen our work, who liked what we were doing, we started getting referred to other clients and the studio grew. It's been a very long, tough journey, but it's been interesting. And we never had this dream of owning a massive studio, expanding to 20 plus people and having stats on our website. People, designers love to say 1,000 plus clients, successful this, successful that. So I think I genuinely don't know how many clients we worked with. We'll have to count. And I don't know in terms of impact, because design impact is not tangible.
Yeah.
So I feel like even now 90% of our clientele come through referrals, and we like it that way, because they have a sense of their aesthetics. They know what our aesthetics are. The people who are recommending us to new clients will already know whether we will work well together or not. So that's how it all began. In 2011, we registered the company and we did a partnership 50-50 as boyfriend and girlfriend, thinking thinking we'll see where this goes, and it's grown into, we're 14 years old now as of January this year.
That's
Yeah,
so cool.
as a
I mean,
studio.
like I was going through your website, Samira, and it's so beautiful to see how many projects you worked on, but also the complexity and diversity of how you're able to bring that to life. Because I was looking at the brands you were working with. You know, there are beer brands, there are baby brands, there's schools, there's books, there's
Yeah,
websites, and I think it's fascinating that you know you are able to take on so many different skill sets and embody that through an individual sort of idea. But as you were saying, I think now it's a much bigger project. But I feel like when you started, it was, you were working with every single client and building it up from the ground. But I
yeah,
think it's nice how you threw light on the possibility of, entrepreneurship and starting off your own sort of pathway as a possible career option for young designers. And
yeah.
I don't think it's only designed for you, because I remember us speaking, for a couple of minutes before the call. You said, and this is something I often think about, is when we meet people, we often ask them, what do you do?
Mm,
We frame our conversations based on that question. But I feel like, as you were saying, people are so much more than their jobs. And,
yeah,
apart from the studio, you've done so many other things. Like you've published two books, one of which was actually produced as a play, One Bedroom Hall Kitchen.
yeah,
You're an active member of a theater group, and on Substack, I think you've been writing so regularly and actively. So,
yeah.
when in your mind, when you have to describe to yourself what do you do, what are some of the answers that come up?
Uh, so I
Or
mean, I've been toying with the idea of what I do. So if anyone asks me at a party, I would perhaps say I do many things,
yeah,
and I am many people at many different times. So how you see me right now is also only one facet of who I am. Um, and 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 thank you for bringing it up, because this question has been kind of lingering for a while now. So when I turned 40 a couple of years ago, as you know, the society loves to call it midlife crisis for women. And I would say at 40, women really come into their own. They've gone through shit, and they have suddenly have this awakening, and they say, I'm not taking it anymore. And I've been having these conversations with my friends for 2 years now. All of them who've been turning 40 have single, that is a single narrative of all women turning 40, saying, I'm done. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. So there is a certain kind of sense of self that has come with age and with experiences, and with that has come the need to not define who I am.
got
So I don't know what I do. I do I do lots of things.
it.
I like to not do also. So this need to produce. So a lot of my, I think now, questions are stemming from what I've done my whole life and questioning why I've done that. This need for productivity, this need to not spend Saturday and Sunday vegging, and that, always saying, okay, no, but I cleaned the house, or I did this, or I wrote an article, or take a 5-day holiday, and not the fact that you don't want to do anything. So what I do is I work because I have to earn money, and because I have a kid and I have to put her through school and college, and very practical things like that. I also work because that money will help me buy clothes that I love buying, and makeup, and I'm not going to shy away from things that I enjoy. But apart from that, my work also in many ways is a very satisfying space. The studio has great energy. This is a space I come to kind of center myself, a space where I come to question, what I'm doing right now, what I want to do 10 years later. And also sometimes I think marvel at the journey that I've had in the last 20 years as somebody who's been working and started with this small, just two people in the studio, and has grown to, five people, and is very happy. And for me, five people is a very rich, large team of people who produce work that makes us happy. So when we work, we do work that makes us happy, and not work that brings us down. But apart from that, I also really enjoy writing, and over time, over the last at least a couple of years, I've been giving more time to that voice. that I've kept quiet because writing was never a profession in which you learn money.
Mm.
And so for that reason, it was always something very private, and it was always something I did on the side. And I think slowly I feel like it's all right if I don't earn money from it. And it's nice to just write because I like writing. And from that, writing has emerged this space where I feel like I can do a little bit more. So Nakab, like, is the project that I'm working on now, combines everything. Combines my, my love for photography, which I don't do professionally, but I love taking photographs anyway. My love of art direction and of storytelling and how you frame things, putting it in context when you write, and this need for narratives to be open to interpretation. It kind
Mm.
of combines all of that. So, uh, you know, maybe if we had to label all the things that I do design. I like, I like where I'm going as an artist. I like writing, but I also like dancing, and I also, in terms of doing a dance whenever I feel like. So, it's like this strange question that
It is.
that we kind of already have blocked ourselves into such cages, little structures, like, this is what your trajectory of life will be like, and when you meet somebody at a party, this is how you'll introduce yourself. And
Yeah.
I wonder what will happen if someone asks me what do I do, and I kind of give some vague ass answer, like, I don't know, I'm a unicorn who likes to poop in the forest. I don't know,
Yeah.
so uh and it's with Instagram and reels, it's also now become very okay to say, these are not party questions you ask, these are 5 questions you should ask to really open somebody up. And I look at them and I laugh, and I'm like, I've been saying that forever. Nobody does any one thing at one particular time. So I am a mother also, I'm a daughter, and I'm a wife, and I'm a friend, and I'm also a designer. I'm many things to many people. um, and I'm fine with not putting any labels on it and not defining it. Uh, but if you ask me what I enjoy doing, I would perhaps be more open to, kind of sharing things that I'm doing right now, or things I'd like to do in the future. But yeah, I mean, that's one question that is, I find hard to answer. And sometimes I'm very flummoxed, and I'm like, oh, I'm a visual design consultant, and then I remember I'm like whacking myself internally, saying, this is not, you keep saying you're not going to introduce yourself like that, but you do. But yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's really nice to listen to you, Samira, because it's also helping me rethink my understanding of what a career and a path should look like, and even the need to define something. Where does that come from as well? Because
Yeah,
I think there is this intersectionality of identities, and you are not just your profession, you are not just your personal experiences. You are so much more than those two spaces that you inhabit. So I really enjoyed listening to you,
thank you.
talking about that, Samira. And just to respect time, and I'd love to talk to you for hours and hours, but I will be linking Samira's Substack, her website, and I hope we get to do this again,
Sure, yes.
yes,
It'd
Samira.
be a
But
pleasure. Perhaps not recorded and over a cup of coffee
yes,
at our studio.
and I feel like reading some of your posts, it's almost like I'm engaging, with a digital friend. And I feel like that's the beauty of a written piece, where without communicating with someone, I feel like there are some parts of you that I know. So it didn't feel very foreign when we spoke, because there were some pieces of you that you left behind in those
Yeah.
written pieces too. So um,
I
for the
think
last,
that's what happens with short-tempered people. Because in conversation, I'm very quick to anger, and I've learned to control it over time and kind of have a more empathetic outlook. Because for me, it's success or die. Either you're the best at what you do or you don't do it. That's what I've grown up hearing.
mm,
You do what you're doing in the best way possible, but if you're going to have a half-baked approach to anything that you do, don't do it. And so I'm trying to move away from that and have a more softer approach to people who are not sure what they want to do. I'm like, I tend to be very judgmental. I'm a harsh critic, the worst critic to myself. A lot of my friends are sometimes scared to tell me talk to me honestly, because they say you're very blunt and you'll just say it like it is. And over time, I've come to soften my words a little. Um, I've completely forgotten what I cut you to say. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, that's
Yeah,
okay.
so
Right.
that's why I like writing,
Yeah.
because it gives me a space to gather my thoughts in a way that is not offensive to anyone, in a way that I can explain what I'm trying to say without the heat of the moment catching on, and kind of talk about things that have happened to me in the past in the hope that there will be some connection. I mean, I can't be the only one who's gone through things like this. I mean, I'm sure there are men and women around the world who've had similar experiences, and my writing is sort of an attempt to try and connect with similar people, or kind of open up space for conversations which are otherwise not very easy to have, on a face to face. And writing allows that kind of privacy.
For sure. And, I remember having this conversation with another friend where, we were just speaking about how when we when we talk about our own experience, at some point, we are able to articulate something that maybe speaks about a larger truth. And then
Yeah.
we were talking about this word called synecdoche, and I was looking up the meaning. It's like a figure of speech where a small part sort of represents the whole. And I feel like a
Hmm.
lot of great art really does that really well, where you talk about one person or one experience, and in some way that tells you something about how humans coexist and relate to each other, or even not relate to each other in some ways.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Samira, for the last question, I just wanted to ask you about a recommendation, like a book or a film that you recently saw, or that I know there must be so many, and it's
So many.
the worst question to ask, but something recent that you've enjoyed reading or watching that, maybe you'd want to share.
um okay. So, I'm not an intellectual reader, and I'm not an intellectual cinema person. I like, I just like stuff that is moves me in different ways, and I'm not, I'm not one of those like I went to watch this documentary and oh wow, I'm very much a Marvel, you know, Korean drama, pop songs. I read a crazy amount of fantasy, which has got lots of smut in it. I'm very easy with my choices, and that is, I think, also because I forced myself to read too many heavy intellectual books in college, because I was surrounded by women who were reading, Milan Kundera and 100 Years of Solitude, and we were reading Joseph Conrad, and it was all about, oh, we're also intelligent because we can talk about all these hectic books. And and then I had these women who actually read for pleasure, and my faculty member introduced me to Great Gatsby
Mm.
in second year, and that just took me to another world, like 1920s America, and love and romance and intrigue and parties. And I was like, why am I reading stuff about like racism and death and long winded tales of families, and then Macondo dying and all kinds of stuff? So I moved away from that, but much later in life. So I went through intellectual reading,
Yeah.
and my earliest in like Ayn Rand was very very transformative for me, and I believe that she's not very cool to talk about anymore, because there's a lot of rape and stuff in her books, which had no idea. Okay, I completely missed that when I read Fountainhead. But Fountainhead for me was one of the most transformative books. I'm not sure if I can recommend it to people anymore, and I don't know if it holds relevance in today's world. But in my little world of 1990s Calcutta, of a little girl reading about somebody saying it's okay to appreciate yourself, and that was huge. I read it when I was 16, and
Mm.
I remember I read it in 1 month. I used to come back from school, eat lunch, and read. That's all I did for 1 month, because it really engrossed me. So my mom introduced me to classics, all the classics, Gone with the Wind, Thornbirds. I went into Fountainhead. She also at some point said it's okay to read Daniel Steele, and then I got into all that, that world of men and women. I read a lot of Mills and Bones. So you'll see sexuality is massive across all my decades, and it also speaks a lot in my writing because it was so repressed when I was growing up. And after very long, it's taken me a space to say that there should not be any shame in talking about desire. So I own it now. And also there's no shame in reading books that no one's heard of, and or like my books have dragons, they have world building, they have languages, they have names, they have it's storytelling in a way that relaxes me. So I read to relax myself and I read to unwind. I don't necessarily read to become very intellectual when I at parties. So I have no such thing. I would say if you're interested, there is a series that I would recommend. It's called Red Rising by Pierce Brown. It's fantastic. It is about intergalactic wars, and it's about politics, it's about caste, it's about class, it's about everything that's happening in the world right now. But it's sci-fi, and there's no romance in it. It's just sci-fi, and there's war, and it's beautifully written. It's a 7 books. I love books which like where the stories really stretch on, and I think we're waiting for the final one to come out this year, I think. But if anyone is new to sci-fi and would be interested in sci-fi, I would say start with Red Rising. It's gorgeous, it's easy, it's superbly written, and it's great fun. It's great fun. And movies, I don't know. I would say definitely. I mean, I recently watched Wong Kar-wai's film. mm, in the mood for love. And I hadn't watched it. And I remember my husband saying, "What? You haven't seen it? It's the single greatest. It's just amazing, this, that." And so we sat and watched it. And I was mesmerized by the movement in the film, the soundtrack. And now the way he shot then has become standard in cinema now. But I had this, I had my husband to guide me through, and he said he's the one who invented this shot of like keeping the camera in place and having people move across. And the fact that you are almost feel like a voyeur in that conversation. You're there, but you're not there. And romance, which is not Hollywood, which is not two people meeting and falling in love in 2 days. And, it's not, that's not how it works. So yeah, I would say if you haven't watched it, watch that movie and read Red Rising. Those are my recommendations. Easy, light, fun. Have a glass of wine while you're at it.
It's very refreshing, and
Yeah.
it's. I will be linking Samira's website, her Substack, in the show notes. Again, it's very hard to articulate and document and archive someone's thinking over such a long period in such a short conversation. But you can follow Samira on Substack, on LinkedIn, and I hope we get to do this again. For the listeners tuning in, thank you again for listening to this episode and holding space for this conversation. Until next time, stay tuned for more such learning stories. Samira, any last words before we end? Uh,
No, I feel like don't let the world define who you are, and don't let uh, don't let your experiences define who you are. Who you are today. They will lead you somewhere, but eventually, who I am today is not who I am tomorrow.
yeah.
So perhaps maybe leave with this very eloquent thing I love telling my daughter is that, perhaps question everything, even
Yeah.
your parents, question yourself more than anything else. And I think if you're able to do that, you're all right. You'll get by. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you again. And this is
Thank you.
Abhishek Shetty on this episode of Learning Stories. Until next time, keep learning.